sometimes I feel terrible that I cannot apply myself fully because I'm there for a limited number of hours. There's a lot more I could actually do, but I would have to be there full time.
Yeah.
And full time is not an option.
And you're a single mom, so really, you really have to try and make sure you make time as well.
Because media is crazy. I mean, those guys work. They work so hard. They're out in the
Please
field.
tell people.
My God, I have a lot of respect for my colleagues.
Yeah.
Especially those who go to the field, because I used to go to the field as a radio reporter, and it's not easy. So I respect them. I have a lot of respect, and I don't think they get celebrated enough, especially in the news. In the entire news piece.
Yes.
Those of us who
people
actually
just see
sit
the
in front
short
of the
story,
set, yes,
and that's it.
They see the short story. They don't know how much work has been put into it, but also they look at us who are sitting in front of the set, telling the stories that someone else has sweated for, and we take a lot more glory than the guys who actually do the hard work. And that doesn't mean we don't do work. I mean, it's hard work being an anchor, you know, but it's harder work doing those stories. So I respect my colleagues who actually go to the field.
True, it's a team. It's a team effort.
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
All right.
And they make us look good.
Without them, can you imagine?
They make us look good.
If you strip everything away, I mean, you can't do it on your own.
Yes,
Absolutely.
that is true.
Okay, so is there anything you feel like that is tugging at you right now? Because you said maybe later on you do a late night show or something.
Now see Crystal's life. I would like, among the things I'd like to do before I die, I'd like to do a radio show. It might be a late night show, or it just might be one of those inspirational shows.
Okay.
Yeah. I have to find the courage. Yeah. And a station that will have me and that time.
At the
Seeing as I'd be adding another thing to my already crazy schedule.
Okay.
Yes.
Now,
but I'd like to do
after
that.
adopting your daughter, I did see somewhere, I know you spoke up for adoption and you're an advocate actually
Yes.
for adoption.
Yeah.
And you talked about all these things. You're right, people do not know. They think it's a complicated process. They think it's extremely difficult, but there's so many children that actually really need homes.
That's true.
And your story is beautiful. I've heard some other stories that are fabulous as well.
Yeah.
So what's the one thing that you feel like, even with your interaction with your family before they got to meet her, I mean, what was the one thing that you felt, oh my God, we need to change this mindset?
It's when you see these kids, when you go to an orphanage and you see these kids, and you think about the fact that they probably have no future in there. They do not have anyone to love on them. And the caregivers try as much as they can. But you can only love on so many babies at the same time, you know. When you look at the fact that they probably won't have a home to shape them, to mold them, to give them values, it's just something it's painful. So in my mind, and the reason why I advocate for adoption is, if I could, I would take all the babies in the world. I could have taken all the babies in that home that day because they were all so beautiful. They were such beautiful babies. But I couldn't. And no one can take all these babies. But each one of us can do something. So I felt that, and initially I wasn't going to tell my adoption story. For all sorts of reasons. I didn't want people poking their nose in my business asking why I didn't have a child. You know, I didn't want those conversations to happen. But I figured if I tell my story, then there are people out there who were like me initially with no information that actually realized, wait a minute, Ugandans can actually adopt kids. And it will also encourage other adoptive parents to actually tell their stories. And there are a lot more people actually telling their stories, you know, because now the stigma around adoption is sort of reducing. You don't even have to explain yourself to anyone, you know. And of course, there are also families that are that have their own birth children, that they're adopting as well, and they're telling their stories. So the more each of us actually tells our story, the more people get information, and the more people actually ask questions and get interested and consider adopting children.
I remember hearing this almost, not exactly foster care, like that concept from abroad, but children can be placed with families.
Yes, it is something that is still currently under pilot. And it was an initiative that was actually started by Child's Eye Foundation because they are that passionate about taking kids out of homes.
Yes, and placing them with families.
So they have a pretty tight working relationship with the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, and they got a lot of buy-in. So now they're actually running a foster care program. So you can actually take in a baby and foster this baby until such a point as either the baby gets adopted or you adopt the baby or they grow and leave. Of course, it's a little bit different because abroad you get financing for that. You get support.
Yeah,
Here it's a little bit different. So when people do it, it's really out of the kindness of their hearts. And I'll tell you for a fact, Crystal, that you get blessed immensely. My life just shifted significantly. But I suppose it's congruent with the scriptures, you know. God is passionate about widows and orphans. And if you do anything in that space from a good place in your heart, the blessings are immense. They're immense. Because you're looking out for someone that has nothing else and no one else. But what it also does for you, and this was my experience, it changes your life. I became a lot more compassionate. I wasn't always compassionate, by the way. Okay, maybe it was somewhere deep in there and I didn't know. And maybe it's the reason. Maybe it was somewhere deep in there and it's what got me to do what I did. Maybe.
Yes.
But it brought out another person in me that I didn't think existed. It actually changed my life. Terribly changed my life.
Wow.
In a good way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
It's a pleasure.
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So you said you're very passionate about young women as well. I think a lot of us are now trying to mentor young women, and we keep talking about the world. How do women fit now? The balance of responsibilities, the expectations on you. As a young woman, you need to be like this, you need to have done that. And you have lived your life like with your own script. Pretty much. So what's your advice to young women who are trying to find their way?
I think it's important for young women to, first and foremost, take the time to know who they are.
Okay.
And that's not a one-off thing. It's not like you just go to this nice place with lush greenery and just sit and just figure it out. You need to take the time to know who you are. What are the things that you're passionate about? What are the things that you value? What are your values? What are the things that make you cry? What are the things that make you laugh? What do you like about yourself? Who are you? Because if you can't crack that, then it becomes difficult to go to the next step. And if you can't crack that, then everything else that's thrown at you seems to make sense. And you have to know who you are, otherwise your perception of who you are gets shaped by what people tell you.
Yes.
And that's a very, very dangerous thing. Whether they're speaking positively or negatively, because sometimes they might be telling you positive things that are not necessarily you, and then you might actually get very haughty. You know. So take the time to understand who you are. Who has God called you to be? I can't take God out of the picture. Unfortunately, you know, I can't, or fortunately, I can't take God out of the picture, because you see, God is the one, He's the author and perfecter of who we are. He created us for a purpose. I believe everyone has a purpose. And because you have a purpose, God has equipped you for your purpose. God places deposits. He gives you talents. He gives you desires. He gives you passions. And these are not random things. All these things are the sum total of who you are for a particular reason. Now, until you understand those things, you cannot move into the next step. And And this is not even a spiritual issue. It also speaks to the career. As a career person,
Yes.
you cannot. So and first and foremost, you're actually a spiritual being. You are spirit, body, and soul. You are made up of 3 beings, but the spirit is actually the heart. It's the engine. So if you're not spiritually alive to who you are and who God has called you to be, it becomes very difficult for you to succeed in other areas of your life. Because we are called to a life of influence. We are meant to be change. We are meant to influence society. We are meant to dominate. Now, you can't do that unless you know how much power you wield. You can't know how much power you wield unless you know who you really are. And it's not something that happens as a one-off. It's actually a journey. And many of us are just becoming awakened to certain aspects of who we've actually been called to be after, like, what, 40 years? You know, you're like, hey, you mean this is actually also somewhere deep within me? But that's because you're busy focusing on other things and you aren't taking the time to understand where you're meant to be. And until you get to that point, you'll probably keep going around in circles. But then at some point in time, and this has been my experience, you'll start questioning the purpose. Why do I not feel like I'm adding any? Why am I even here? Why am I working in this organization? Why am I doing the things I do? They just don't seem to make sense.
Yeah.
Because you're not comfortable, because you're not where you need to be. Or you might be in an organization, it's the right organization, because there's nothing like a right or wrong organization, but you're not doing what you are supposed to do in that organization. And I'm not talking about your job description, because you can't be placed in an organization as the communications person, for example. But how much influence do you have on the people that you work with? Positive influence in terms of building them, in terms of encouraging them, or are you just showing up at work and just work?
You can have influence in any field. Yeah.
And when we talk about a calling on our lives, many people think church. It's not church. The world is more than church. We are called to influence in the marketplace, wherever we are. Not all of us can serve in church, but we can be servant leaders where we are. What kind of people are we in our workplaces, in our families, in our communities? And that's really important because that's where you get the satisfaction from.
True. That is the question we all ask, why am I here? What am I doing? How am I making a difference? And that applies to both men and women, actually.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope it wasn't terrifying for you.
Initially it was. Surprising. It's always easier to sit on the other side of the table.
I know.
When you're the one who's answering the questions, you're thinking, hi. It's harder. But yeah, it was initially. And initially, I'm going to have to talk about my life because, like you rightly put it, my life is not necessarily out there.
No. She's done a very good job of
this is actually the beginning for me. And I must confess, I started being comfortable doing stuff like this when I read a book at the turn of last year, Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes.
Yes, the
I
year
said,
of yes.
you know what? I need to start doing things that I'm not used to doing, and it's changed my life. Last evening, I was having a talk with the ladies at MTN. It's a project, Girls for Girls. So I had a mentorship talk with them. Ordinarily, if I got a phone call to do something like that, I would find 1,000 reasons not to do it.
Go.
There's a part of me that wants to do it, but I'm thinking, nah, I have too much work. I'm busy, I can't come. But since I read that book, I told myself, I need to start doing things differently. And it's been very rewarding. And I hope that by, just sitting here and chatting with you, someone out there will think, okay, she's not perfect. After all, she's not perfect. She can be strange. So it's okay to be strange as long as you're okay in your skin.
It's okay to be your quirky self.
Yes.
That's
just be comfortable with who you are. Because you have to live with yourself for a very long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
True. Well, thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you too. Thank you.